everybody. Thank you so much for joining me here today at Re-Written Vintage Homestead. Look at this beautiful scenery behind me. You know, I had one of my subscribers got a hold of me this week and said, Mrs. Re-Written, I really like the content that you've had up lately, but what are we going to do about finishing that book? Well, I have been working from home since the middle of May, and we have not read the Dollmaker since then. I totally forgot about it because we were doing our at-work edition. And I feel bad because I have about 60 of my subscribers that are really into this, and they follow it every chapter. So you guys, I promise we're going to pick it up right now, and we're going to stay loyal to it and true, and we are going to see this thing through the end. And I think you're going to like it, that even though we're not doing our at-work edition, now we can start seeing a change of scenery. And we have a special guest here that's going to be listening to story time. And we have a special guest that is so excited that now that we are doing our at-work editions here at home, he can listen to story time. So while I sit here at the picnic table and read, he's going to sit there in the golf cart and listen. Aren't you, Marshall? Do you like story time? Hey, say hi, everyone. Hey. Hi. Say hi, everybody. So when we left off in chapter 7, Gertie had just found out from Clovis that he got a factory job. Well, Gertie, I passed the army, but they didn't want me, not right away. But that employment office told me a long time back to go to a factory, and I come to Detroit. It was near as close as coming back home. I got a job that suits me, and it pays good. I sold the truck. You know, I not hardly made nothing with it. That won't be more coal to haul till the war is done. It was them good new tires. I owed Lister some, and I paid it. And I'm taking some, and I will send you more when I have a payday. Now, don't be stingy, Gertie. Buy what you need. You and the children needs clothes. I want you to have it so hard. Write to me. Now, Gertie was very disappointed because her way of thinking was he's going to be sending for the children and I. He's going to want us to come. And she had made up her mind at the end of the chapter she wasn't going. He can work there all he wants. He can send her the money, whatever money he wants to. She'll save it for the land that she wants to buy. And he can save his money for a new truck for when the war is over, but she's not going. And the chapter 7 ended so beautifully with so many biblical discussions and thoughts going through her head, which I want to touch on in another video. So we will, because I have some questions, you guys. But anyway, that's where we ended. And her and Callie Lou are skipping along, and they're very excited. So let's pick up with chapter 8. Now, don't go fighting, young'uns, Gertie said in an uninterested sing-song voice unusual for her. She held the knife still above an almost finished axe handle and looked at the angry Clyde and the stubborn Reuben. You've both worked mighty hard all morning. By the time to go home this evening, we'll have our place might nigh ready to move into. We've already got the kitchen scrubbed and cleaned, she went on, making a long, thin, shaving curve downward from the handle. I guess if I hadn't had us such a good, steady young'uns, we'd never in the world have got us enough together to buy us a place of our own, and would have gone on a being renters all our days. Now don't spoil it by a fussing when we've took time out to rest. So they bought it. They bought the Tipton place. But Mom, curtains, real window curtains, all white, pure white. 4 sets for this room. Clyde leaned forward across the open, borrowed Montgomery Ward catalog and spoke in earnest, pleading. It's not like I was asking for something fine like them fancy ruffled things Ann Liz Kramer bought, but they'd be real curtains, not feed sack things. I know they won't help in farming none, but she sighed, seeing starched curtains by clean windows, they'd be so pretty. I'd go down to the river and get me some pretty straight canes for poles. And Gertie smiled as she had smiled at all things on this day. If Clyde didn't get her curtains this week, she would soon. Clovis would be sending more money, and if he didn't, she'd spare her some egg money. She wouldn't have to be so stingy ever anymore. She had a place of her own, same as had it. Night before last, she'd taken cash money to John. As soon as the weather cleared enough, he'd ride to the valley, and there he would take a bus to town, where he'd record the deed for her. She wouldn't have to waste a day's time trailing into town to see about the deed or lose a minute's sleep wondering if he'd back out of the deal or lose her money. John didn't lose money or back out of deals. What's that dog doing, everybody? Keep an eye on him. Okay. There came a screaming and a banging from the big room on the other side of the fireplace wall. Clyde rushed to the noise, her feet faster than her mother's slowly rousing mind. "It's that Cassie," she called back. "She's told Amos into the cubbyhole by the fireplace and turn the button and run off." When Gertie continued silent, only making another long shaving fall from the axe handle, smiling on it as if it had been gold, Clyde raised her voice in a kind of beseeching scolding. "Cassie Marie, can't you behave yourself, a-locking up Amos that way? Are you always going to be this mean in your own home?" Cassie laughed. "I didn't do nothing. It was Callie Lou locked him up, and I warn't no more'n she ought to have done. He come in drunk from Indiana. Fought 1 cent for his wife and youngins. He spent all his money it was his paycheck in a beer parlor, silly. That's what Sue Annie said, and it was old Willie Sexton done it. Mom, Cassie's telling lies again. Cassie, don't you know it's sinful to be a-telling lies? It's against the Bible." Gertie roused, but spoke without harshness. "First cast the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of your brother's eyes. Always recollect, girl, that when you think the Bible's on your side, it's maybe on the other fellow's side too." That's a good lesson to remember. She reached out and for no reason at all give Clyde, big girl that she was, the warm, hard hug she would have given a baby, and then asked, "Did you write your papa a nice long letter?" "I meant to read it, but a hunting axe handles and sled runners out of our woods made me so late there wasn't time to read it and send it to the mail." Clyde nodded. "I told him everything I could think on, Mom. But not about our place," she added quickly. Clyde giggled. "No, I done like you said. I saved it for a surprise. Mom, wouldn't it be fun for him not to know till he had come a-walking in?" "He'd get to like it," Gertie said. She looked out the large, bare room, its low walls covered with torn and faded building paper. They were straight and solid under the hewn oak rafters that held up the wide, thick oak planks of the ceiling, which also served as floor for the rooms above. Rafters and ceiling had never known paint or paper and were weathered to a deep tobacco-colored brown. She considered the 4 windows, 2 on the east, 1 on either side of the door in the southern wall. They were small and narrow, but unbroken and deeply recessed in the thick, long walls, hidden from the hot sun of the summer afternoon, but set to catch most of its warmth on the short winter days. Never would the windows get the cold-blowing rain from the northwest, no more than would the door. Made of 3 great oak planks with 3 cross battens, it was a mighty door, big enough for her to step proudly through with the backlog on her shoulder. A length of a dead sugar tree above the spring that she and Reuben had sawed down yesterday. It flamed now in the fireplace with a good steady heat and made a warm and rosy-colored light, so bright there was at times a flicker of red like a blush on the walls. Outside, the gray November rain came down, not settled yet into the steady down-dropping, but in gusts and squalls on the southwest wind that had risen with the red dawn. And at each cry of the wind or spatter of the rain, Gertie nodded a little and smiled. It was good to hear the wind and rain and never feel it in your house. She made another long stroke, then left the knife across her knees, and with both hands grasped the axe handle and swung it. Her gray eyes gleamed with satisfaction. A gust of wind, louder than the others, leaped against the house and cried in the pines on the hillside. Gertie looked again at the windows and saw the pale gold of the late-hanging poplar leaf plastered against the glass. She turned and studied the fire, and her look of satisfaction broke into a smile as she watched the smoke, untouched by the wind, rise steadily upward. I knowed this was a mighty good fireplace. That wind'll never catch in the chimney and blow smoke all over creation. Reuben lifted his head from the white oak maul he was making and nodded in agreement, and she asked, "How you coming, son? Strange work always seems to be hard at first." "I ain't no hand at a whittling," he said, "but maybe I can make a maul. If a maul ain't balanced just right, it'll make splitting out chunks of them shakes twice as hard," she warned, but added in an encouraging tone, "You maybe ought to get the knack at a whittling, but it's a good thing to learn enough to make your own sled runners and sich." "Mom, I been a-thinking," Reuben said, speaking slowly, straightening the words in his head as always, for poor Reuben had not one bit of his Aunt Sue Annie's quick tongue. "Clyde ought to have her curtains. It's pretty late to sow grass seed, and come March I'll have more money. Grandpa's a-aiming to pay me for helping with the fall work, and this winter I ought to make a heap from trapping. There's nobody left but me to trap." Clyde roused from her dreams over a page of dishes, willowware that was blue and poppies in a garden, red and green and yellow drooping-headed flowers. "Reuben, you go ahead and get your grass seed now, 'fore it's too late. I've been a-thinking. Mammy gives me 50 cents for a night I stay with her and help her with the work. I was a-aiming to save it and buy me a coat, but there ain't no place to wear it, so I don't need it. Pretty soon I'll have enough for me some curtains." She looked down at the catalog, "and maybe some dishes, too." Gertie got up quickly, folded the knife, and dropped it into her pocket. When she had hefted the handle, it seemed like it needed a little stroke or two more down the next head, but she couldn't sit still any longer. Dance. Her heart wanted to do that. So would her feet, she guessed, if so many people like her mother didn't think it was sinful. To sit by her own fire and burn wood from her own land with no debts like some, all this and such wonderful children. "Law, young'un," she said when she could speak, "there's no need for neither of you to give in to the other. Clyde, you do need a coat. If I was you, I'd save your money for clothes of some kind. We'll have plenty of money. You're forgetting about the heating stove money. You said Angie Tucker, when you seed her down at Mamie's, would give us $10 cash for it. Well, I'm aiming to put that and 5 more I think I can spare on furnishings." She wished, watching Clyde's face, that she could spare $25. $15 will buy you a heap of house plunder. Why don't you look at the linoleums?" she went on. Clyde sprang up and wheeled on her toes and then stood still, her eyes sparkling up as she said, "Oh, Mom, we could make this the prettiest room with curtains and linoleum. We could leave the beds out and have what they call a sitting room, a front room. They mean like Mrs. Hall's, where a body don't eat and sleep neither." Gertie chuckled and stroked Clyde's hair. "Now don't be getting too fine and fancy right away, girl. I figured that linoleum for the kitchen. It'd save a heap of scrubbing. I like them old beds mighty good, but someday," she went on, smiling at Clyde, "'fore you're big enough to have a beau, we'll make this into a nice front room. On our own land like this is where we can keep every bite and raise. We don't have to be moving every year. We can get ahead a sight faster." Thump, thump, and smothered cries took her rushing to the stairway in time to catch Cassie as she rolled onto the narrow landing above the little door. She seized her, shook her, blew in her face, and then ran with her to the window to see what bones were broken. The limp little figure dangled over her arms. The head with the straggly hair slipped as ever from its braids, flopped backwards toward the dangling hand-me-down shoes. Gertie, shaking her, whispering in terror, "Cassie, honey," blowing breath into her saggy mouth, remembered guiltily that with all her riches, not one new thing had been bought for Cassie. and that in all the hurry to get the new house before the certain rain promised by the warm, windy, reddening sunrise, she'd not even combed Cassie's hair. "Clyde, get a dipper of cold water, quick!" Then the limber arms were flung around her neck. The sagging mouth was a-laughing, while the two big shoes flew to the far corners of the room, and Cassie kicked her heels. "Oh, Mom, you look so funny. I got tired of this sinful Satan-ridden earth, and I went up to heaven." She sighed and slid from her mother's arms. "I didn't like it no good. That Callie, she pulled them gold feathers out of a big angel's wings and throwed away her crown. It went a-bouncing and a-bouncing down them golden stairs clean down to this Satan-ridden world." Blighty, her face white with fury, torn from her linoleum, willowware, and curtains, threatened to throw the dipper of water into Cassie's face. But Gertie was too relieved to do more than a slap on her bottom, hard enough, as Clyde pointed out in disgust, to squash a fly, and threatened to beat little Callie Lou till she was pickle black and blue from head to toe. Cassie ran back up the stairs hole, Jip at her heels. Gertie, for the first time, recollected the job she had given Enoch seemed like hours ago, and that from him she had since heard no sound. She climbed the narrow stairway. 3 steps there were below a wide plank door that fastened with a button, then a little landing, and the stairs turned. She reached the top step, but instead of calling to Enoch in the attic above, she stopped and for the 10th time admired the upstairs. The log house had been built by the old pattern where the logs were laid high enough for a real upstairs with windows, and divided like that below into 2 main rooms. She went to the one that had a little fireplace just big enough to burn cook stove wood. She looked at the corner between the fireplace and the window that was a place for the block of wood. Nights up here in the firelight, she'd bring the head out of the wood. She could do fine work when the young'uns were asleep and Clovis wasn't around to talk. And now with her own land, she'd never have to feel guilty about wasting time. Such good rooms. Out one window, she would be able to see the North Star, and from the other, she could look down the valley toward the big South Fork and her mother's house. Almost every day she would see her father. His land touched her land. Her land. Her land. Then she remembered Enoch and raised her voice. "Enoch, you found any leaks, son?" "She ain't a-leaking," Enoch answered after her second call. "Well, you been looking good? Don't wait for the drops. Look good, all under the shakes, and see if you're seeping anything, any place." She waited, and hearing no sound of feet over the boards to token his searching, she called again. "You being careful with that lantern. What you a doing nohow and being still?" "Mom," he said as he came and stuck his head over the cubby hole, "I look good, real good, but there wasn't any leaks." She saw the book in his hand. "Oh, so you been a-sitting a-wasting good coal oil and a-reading when you could have been a-pulling them old nasty newspapers off of our bedrooms." "We're going to start moving in less than a week." She sighed and studied her second son with more sorrow and puzzlement than anger. "Enoch, honey, what ails you? Everybody else is a-working and a-planning, and you got to go a-setting reading books instead of looking for leaks." Enoch held out the book for her to see. "Honest, Mom, I looked for leaks real good. I saw all these books, and I recollected you wanted us to study every day like we was a-going to school. So I studied some spelling. There's a sight of books, but they're old, and they got, pretty pictures, though." Gertie took the book, a narrow little thing, the back a faded blue and the pages yellow and worn. "It's an old blue back speller," she said. "They quit using them when your grandma was a little girl, but all the same, many's the night your grandpa had me spell out of it." "Aw, Mom, there's a book with the funniest number problems." "Raise higher arithmetic, I bet," Gertie said, and reached for the armload of books Enoch held. She raised her voice. Clyde, you been wanting books. Come and see what Enoch's found." Clyde and the others came running and explored the pile. The books were mostly readers with small pictures showing little girls with long ruffled panties and the little boys with hats and hair long as the girls. One most was the name McGuffey. I had a McGuffey reader. Did you guys have a McGuffey reader? Printed large. Inside were names in faded ink. The one most often seen was Maggie Gordon, the Maggie beginning with a great curling M. When the children wanted to know who Maggie Gordon was, Gertie fell into a long musing and was remembering aloud of who had married whom before she realized that this was the Maggie Gordon who had married old Isaac Tipton and was the grandma of Silas Tipton, who had gone off to Muncie, Indiana. She was up in Deer Lick graveyard now with Uncle Isaac. Gertie thumbed through one of the books. Many of the poems were familiar as old neighbors who, though moved away and not seen for years, seemed neighbors still when they were seen again. "Look, young'un," she said, glancing up from into the ward of whitewashed walls, with the guilty realization that she was wasting time too. "You all have been a-working hard. The rain's kind of slacking. I better go up in our patch of timber and hunt me a little hickory that'll do for saw handles and a good, big, tough maul, for we'll be a-having to split some rails pretty soon. While I'm gone, you can all do your little study until dinner time. Clyde, you start getting some poems by heart. Pick out something good, and the rest of you'uns practice reading and a-spelling." She caught the sorrowful, shamefaced look that always came into Cassie's face at the mention of reading. "All but Cassie and Amos, and they can get a poem by heart. Cassie, there's a real pretty poem. I got it by heart when I was about your size. Look through the second reader, Clyde. I don't think I recollect it all. Once there was a little kitty with paws as white as snow." They gathered in a ring around the hearth, heads bowed over the books, with Cassie whispering after Clyde about the kitten that frolicked a long time ago. Gertie took the big double-bitted axe and went out into the wind and the rain. She climbed to the edge of the cornfield above the house and stopped and looked back. Gray rain and curls of fog from the rising creek and the river made the hills across the creek seem one black iron mountain, smudged and indistinct. Her father's farm and the hills beyond the river were blotted out so that she could see little but her own. Just below her and her house, with the blue smoke rising and set in the curving sweep of grassland, as green almost from the warm fall rains as grass in the spring, she saw the apple trees, black-trunked, gray-twigged in the rain, the pear trees, the peach, rising out like an outpost in the fog, the great poplar by the spring, its arms held up as if reaching for the sky. She wished she could see the cedar bluffs above the creek, with more cedar for fence posts than she would ever need, and the old sugar trees with their gray, scarred bark, and the beech trees with their thin, fine twigs that would on winter nights make a lace pattern against the stars. Sawbriars pulled at her skirt, and rain-drenched sumac and sassafras sprouts slapped at her, but she continued to smile as she plodded on through the old cornfield. Now and then she would stop to cut a sprout or a grapevine, whispering to it and laughing a little. "Just you wait till I get started. Away you'll all have to go to make way for my grass and clover and corn." She came at last to the steeper part of the hillside that had never been plowed, and among the brush and the second-growth timber were several young hickories and an old one scarred by lightning. She paused, axe uplifted by the old one, but the axe came slowly back to her shoulder, and she smiled at the old hickory. "You'll be good and tough," she said, "and your wood's hard and dead, but I'll leave you for seed and hickory nuts for the squirrels and my young'uns." She considered some of the less thrifty of the small hickories, but always, instead of cutting, she always slashed away at the nearby hornbeam or other useless brush, whispering to the little hickory as she did so, "It won't be many years for you'll be big enough for the sawmill. Maybe I'll be a-needing you in that new barn I'm aiming to build." It was with a little sigh and a fleeting look of sorrow that at last she chose her tree. There was more than enough for a straight trunk, for the big maul and the handles, but some winter weight of snow, some accident with a man or animal or weather, had crooked the top so that it could never grow into a fine upstanding tree. Like Gertie, I've been saving my hickory nuts too, for the squirrels and for my dog, because he loves hickory nuts. I know, it's crazy. You gonna get you a nut, Marshall? Look at all of these. And the beautiful trees up here. I hope you all are having a wonderful, beautiful, blessed week.